If you think you felt a great disturbance in the Force, you're not wrong. Ed Gross and me, Mark A. Altman, have a new oral history coming out this July from St. Martin's Press. It's Secrets of the Force, the complete, uncensored, unauthorized oral history of the Star Wars saga. So wherever you buy books, audio, and video, pick it up today, pre-order, and you can learn the secrets of the Force. And don't miss our oral history of Star Trek in stores now. And of course, nobody does it better, the complete oral history of James Bond in digital, hardcover, paperback, and audio. That is all.
If you're a fan of the 430 movie, you'll love Best Movies Never Made, hosted by myself, Josh Miller.
And Steven Scarlatta,
where we explore some of the greatest movies never made, like E.T. 2,
Johnny Quest,
Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian,
and Halloween 3D.
New episodes available every other Monday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey, this is Mark A. Altman of the 430 Movie. I'm here with
Steve Melching, Darren Doctorman,
Ashley Miller.
And if you want to know what Ashley's pick out of the box is, you owe it to yourself to watch the 430 Movie live. You should see the expressions. The
live
only
on
way
tape
to understand the kinds of faces we're making when Ashley does Wednesday is to watch us on Electric Now. It's one thing to hear us, but you can't see the expressions on our face.
You can't hear disbelief.
Coming soon, our new podcast, Ashley Does Wednesday.
Ash Wednesday.
Ash Wednesday.
Ash Wednesday.
Caught in an endless time loop.
We could have been trapped here for hours, days, maybe years.
Unable to remember the past.
How did it happen? How did we get there?
A starship collision lies dead ahead.
We have to get out of here now.
Can the crew escape their own destiny?
Casualty reports coming in from all over the ship.
Or will time tick towards their final hour?
All hands abandon ship!
On Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
And this is Darren Doctorman, and we are the Inglorious Treksperts. And this is
the Treksperts Briefing Room, where we curate significant episodes of Star Trek with writers, producers, and stars from the history of Trek. And today, we're very happy to once again have the great Brannon Braga. At the time, he was a lowly staff writer at the time? Or you were executive story editor, or were you a producer by now?
I was a staff writer.
Oh, way back when. This is before.
This was my second season with the show. And I didn't have an on-screen credit. I was a staff writer.
Brannon, of course, has gone on to be showrunner for Star Trek Voyager, Enterprise, executive producer on the Orville. He's created shows like Salem and Terra Nova and Flash Forward. And the list goes on and on. Much success. He's now...
You got to start picking shows that weren't canceled.
Oh, yeah, every show is canceled. Eventually, Gunsmoke was canceled. Look at this legacy of television you leave behind. It's amazing. We could pick, a roulette wheel with, 100 episodes that you've written. I'm sure most of them would be.
Well, and this would be, in terms of the ones I've been asked to talk about the most and asked about the most, this is certainly one up there. And it's one of my favorites too.
In the past, we've talked about, your tenure on Enterprise. We talked about writing the movies like Generations and First Contact. But this is, at the beginning, it was a very delicate time.
Yes.
You were,
It was.
Look, you have become renowned for being sort of the king of the time loop, or these great time episodes. With throughout all the shows, time travel became your raison d'etre, right? And this was the first. This was and it was really the first time since yesterday's Enterprise that Star Trek, did time in a really interesting way. Because if you look back, their idea of doing time travel was like Maurice Hurley, Time Squared, which was a second season episode, which was, super dopey. And this was really obviously had a lot of impact, of course, because, it is one of the great Star Trek teasers of all time, which we'll see in just a moment.
Yeah. I mean, there were a list of things that Gene Roddenberry, I don't want to say opposed, but certain things, he was skeptical of doing dream sequences and time travel. Mm-hmm. And I totally understand his wariness of time travel. It's like, but I think what we started to do well on Star Next Gen was not do the time travel trope of just traveling back to prevent something from happening. And this was the first, one of the first, if not the first, time loop stories brought to the screen. I don't know if there's been a time loop story like this in movies or television. There were some in literature, I believe there were, but this was kind of so new at the time that when it aired, people called the local TV stations saying something was wrong with the TV.
Right.
Or something was wrong with the broadcast.
Sure. People forget, now they call it the Groundhog's Day episode, but it's like this was before Groundhog's Day was made and released.
Yes, it was by 2 years, maybe somewhere in that range. Yeah.
And it's funny because you've seen variations on this theme done on a lot of genre shows since. But this was really the first time it was done. People's idea of time travel was City on the Edge of Forever. Yeah. You go back, something has changed, the Terminator, whatever.
And this was a way of doing time travel without doing time travel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is how I looked at it.
Great. Well, let's take a look at the episode. You can watch it on the beautiful CBS home video Blu-ray set, the remastered set that was released a few years ago. Or, of course, you can stream it on Paramount Plus, Amazon, Netflix, or wherever you watch your Star Trek episodes. So if you will, Darren, count us down and we'll begin Brannon's commentary on cause and effect.
All right. And the fingers on the play button. Here we go.
We're doing commentary together.
Oh, yeah.
We're doing it together.
Our commentary.
No, we're not just going to shut off our mics and let you go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm going to go have lunch. Enjoy. Have a good commentary. Good luck.
All righty. Here we go, everybody. Ready to press play in 3, 2, 1, go.
Oh, God, I have to look at it in writing. That's going to remind me of...
That's interesting. John Frakes hadn't directed a ton at this point of television. Now he's an old hand. He's a journeyman. He's a veteran TV director, having done a ton of TV. But he really does a beautiful job with this episode. And this is a challenging show to do because, of course, it could feel very redundant if you kept shooting things the same way. I mean, the key was the subtlety of reshooting this multiple times, multiple ways. Did you guys spend much time doing tone meetings and talking about your script?
At this point, I was not. No, I was a lowly staff writer, and I didn't really get involved with those kinds of things. I was excited that Jonathan was directing it, and he did do an amazing job of keeping things just different enough without calling attention to the directing. So his directing is as much a star as anything in this episode. It had to be handled just the right way.
Right.
And I think it was good that he was somebody who was on that set every day, interacting with those actors every day. He was exactly the right person to do the episode.
He also knew how these sets were shot, so he could find different ways to shoot them that weren't the same standard ways where, okay, we throw the camera on sticks here and we shoot this way. And it's like...
That's right. This episode, I wish I'd kept all of the documentation and story memos and all the things that went on. I was trying to figure out how to do a Rashomon type episode where we would see the same act of Next Gen seen from a different perspective. And somehow stumbled onto this idea instead, which is it's not Rashomon, but it's more like the same act from a more existential point of view. And I really got excited at the idea of doing the ultimate teaser, which is the show blowing up, and which was a model. We blew up models back then, and which was pretty cool. The old undercranked,
data card.
Going back to Lance Henriksen and Aliens.
But Kelsey Grammer, of course. And it just kind of evolved into this really cool time loop idea. And it's deceptively simple in the writing too. It was actually very challenging to do because you'd think I could just cut and paste the same act over and over again, but I had to figure out a way to keep telling a story within the same iteration.
Right.
And it wasn't just me. I mean, I remember I got to a point where I'm like, how in the hell do I end this thing? And I remember sitting in the writer's room with Ron Moore and Michael Piller and Jerry Taylor and Joe Manosky and us banging our heads against the wall until we came up with this idea of the subliminal message, which we'll see later in the episode. That was not easy to get to. It's not like I have some kind of brain that's just bubbling with inspiration. Some of this stuff comes to you, and some of it you really have to struggle to figure out. And when you have something like this, you got to end well. It better be good.
Well, plus during the storytelling, you also have to keep in mind what the audience is reacting to and how they're trying to follow along and the questions they're asking. And in order to take these same scenes and give some sort of a progression, I'm sure isn't easy at all.
No, it's one thing that I learned to do well was take heady concepts. I'd say do well maybe half the time. Was take kind of these high concept, complex ideas and make them understandable and dramatic.
Right.
Later, we'll see the scene where Geordi's explaining the temporal causality loop, which was my first big observation room scene where I had to explain what was going on. And I must have rewritten that scene 25 times.
Sure.
I remember, we'll get there, but, and here's, we liked using the poker scenes for little plot things.
And then the poker scenes, though, largely had been for character moments, or sometimes episodes were short and you'd film a poker scene to pad out an episode. Here, the poker scene is really, so important to telling the story and to obviously understanding what's going on.
It's kind of the grounding scene, and it's used as a plot device. And another plot device that we would employ sometimes, the Geordi visor.
Right.
In fact, having rewatched this again recently, there's a scene in here, I'll point it out when we get there, that Geordi's visor doesn't really factor into the plot in a huge way. He's seeing after images, which I guess is cool. But there's a long scene where Crusher's scanning his visor later in the show that, to me, stops the momentum a bit. And it's when I watched it again, I'm like, what were we thinking here? This scene's unnecessary. Because every scene in this show is necessary. There's only one that I saw that I thought I would have cut that.
Mm. And what's that?
It's a scene where she's scanned. I'll point it out to you when it comes up.
Okay.
It's late. It's very late in the episode where things should have just been, where you can feel the building tension, and then this one scene happens that just kind of stops.
It's as if it's a reiteration of something that you didn't need to.
That's right. You did, but not only was it a repeating of something, I was showing you something you hadn't seen, which was kind of cool, but you didn't really need to see it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'll point that out. That people tend to remember this little scene with Crusher I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. But, there's this thing where she knocks her glass of grappa,
Right.
or whatever's in that little thing over, becomes a key motif in kind of the unstoppable fate feeling that you start to get later in the episode, which is, I think, very effective. That they're just doomed to keep destroying themselves.
And it's interesting because it's something like Yesterday's Enterprise, which is, obviously a great episode of Next Generation, but, sort of the catalyst from them finding out that you're not in reality, Guinan feels something and convinces Picard, obviously is not the strongest solve there. Whereas in this episode, it feels a lot more credible that, which in no way takes away from Yesterday's Enterprise, because obviously they need to find out somehow. But this is much more subtle in the way that you start to, reveal that something is amiss and the characters are starting to become privy to it.
And I really like that aspect of it. It's a very cool techno mystery. And I love that just when they figure it out, they're about to get destroyed and forget everything. It's very cool. And here we have these scenes were always kind of, the flux spectrometers were down for realignment. But I always liked writing about that stuff. Graviton, I can't even pronounce it. There's something just kind of, it's kind of poetry at times.
It prepared you for Cosmos.
Yes. It had to have the right ring to it. And we had a science advisor at this time. It was Maritn Shankar.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting, this is, within the next couple of years, it would be you and Noreen and Ron and Renee and just like this total, slugger's row of writers who would go on to do such great television over the next 20 years. But, this is like the last vestige of some of the older, Herb Wright was still, this was the season Herb Wright was back, Crazy Herb.
Yeah.
And as a young writer, sort of what were your takeaways from working with people, obviously with Michael and Herb to a lesser extent, and because this was all kind of new to you. This is the very beginning of your career as a TV writer.
Sure. I had the benefit of having already been involved with the show for a season. Look, for me, when I first got there, between seasons 3 and 4, what they were doing in that writer's room seemed like magic to me. I remember thinking, I cannot do this. I didn't know this is how it was done. How are they coming up with all these ideas? But I learned from being there and observing, and I was lucky that I was on a show that kind of spoke to me, the USS Bozeman. I really saw some opportunities to do some cool science fiction-y type stuff. My episodes on this show weren't the deepest episodes. This is not what I would call a character piece. It uses the characters well, and it's fun, but it's not deep.
But it is a unique techno mystery, and again, like you said, it was when this was completely novel. Obviously it's a well that has been gone back to, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. But this was really the beginning of this kind of storytelling that you sort of minted, and it really, and obviously the fact that it holds up so well is fantastic.
Well, this was all done with models. It's funny, when I was writing it, I thought, this is really cool. And my job was to make it work. I used to have one of the cells from one of those explosions that I had this visual effects guy sign, like Rob Legato. I wish I still had it. But when you're making something like this, you're so focused on trying to make it good that you're not necessarily aware that you're doing something new. So I really, truly was not aware until I found out coming to work like a few days after it aired, that people were flipping out because they thought something was wrong with the broadcast.
Right.
And calls and people. And then I thought, wow, okay, so this was, and then it became clear as the months went by that it was an enormously popular episode.
Right.
It was popular when it came out. And so it certainly was encouraging to me to do more stories like this.
Now, it's interesting. This scene is the subtle changes in the direction. We have a slightly different point of view this time. It's not the same shot setups as before. There are a couple similar settings, but it's slightly different, and that's what makes it an interesting new experience.
Yeah, but what's really interesting at the time is this is back when TV was shot on film and usually with one camera.
Yeah.
But for these scenes, they were using multiple cameras to shoot at the same time, rather than have to go back and because obviously they wanted all this stuff shot from different angles. Brannon, did you go back? Were you able to go down to the set at all and see any of this be filmed?
A little bit. Yeah. And also, I mean, I think you have to credit I don't know who edited this episode, but you really need to give a lot of credit to the editors.
Sure.
Because as you point out, we sometimes we shot single cameras, sometimes usually on the bridge, multiple, or the observation room, just to shoot things more efficiently. So there was a lot of clever editing going into making each scene a little bit different too. And I'll have to look at who edited this. I wish I remembered. I really like this scene. There's a great line in this scene, I think, where Beverly talks about having deja vu.
Yeah.
Lines, both of us at the same time. Or both of us about the same thing? God, I can't remember. Must not have been a good one. I can't remember what it was. But it's a goosebumpy moment.
And you're also servicing some underserved characters here because, a lot of the stories would be, Picard, Riker, Data, Worf. But this is a really strong episode for Gates and for, Dr. Crusher and Geordi as well.
I like doing episodes with those characters. Like I liked Riker a lot. I did a couple of cool episodes for him. It might also have been because it was so intimidating to write for Picard. Data was the easiest in some ways because he's such an immovable object. His reactions to things are always the same. And you just know what he would say about stuff. But Picard, Picard had to be brilliant and articulate and all the things that you're not necessarily feeling the day you're sitting down to write.
Again, the difference in direction. Both these previous scenes are basically from a different side of the stage line. They're different screen direction. So he's swapping it up.
I wish Frakes was here for this.
Well, he is here in his direction that we're watching.
And, look, we obviously, you work with Frakes many times, and now on the Orville, I've worked with Frakes on a couple episodes of TV too. He's just the greatest. He's such great energy. And he just puts everybody at ease on set. There's a lot of sense, I think, of what a director is. And, there's this von Stroheim kind of, sense that people have, or Otto Preminger, Frakes is the exact opposite of that. He is just, let's put on a show kind of high school theater kind of exuberance.
Yep.
It was the eeriest feeling.
They're getting
She has a ribbon in her hair for some reason.
More intensely than I've done it all before.
These two actors, they always tried to bring a lot of subtext to these scenes. There's a weird beat at the end of this scene where she thanks him, and it is loaded with years of romantic subtext. It's just I think sometimes, especially in a script as shallow as this one, They're just looking for something.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that, the writers had wanted to avoid, which was the idea of developing the romance between them, but that they would find it anyway in the subtext.
Yeah.
And yeah.
We didn't avoid it. We just were like, let it be. Here it is. Yeah. See, for everything.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you for everything. That for everything.
Yeah.
Was loaded with something that's only in Gates' head.
Right.
But it's nice to see them together. And then, these scenes were particularly well done because Frakes had to be very specific about what he was doing here. And the way he covers this, it just kind of...
Go ahead. We are getting unusual.
Well, and these are such hard scenes to shoot because whenever 8 people are sitting around the table, and they've been doing it for 4 years, it's very hard to find interesting ways to shoot that.
And I gotta tell you, I'm just so fond of this cast. They were so game. I mean, the idea, I just love that they're all in, on this idea. I'm like, what was it like for them? They never knew what they were getting when a script came in. It's not like they were pitched something ahead of time. They were just kind of like, there it was.
Yeah. It's not like a police procedural where you've said this. You said Star Trek is an anthology with recurring characters.
To me, this would have, but this could have been an episode of The Twilight Zone, but it's 1,000 times better as an episode of Star Trek.
Right. Because
you want to see. I love the USS Bozeman, of course, named after my hometown.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I just love these visual effects. There's just something with models that is a little more tangible than the CGI.
Absolutely, it just feels more real and present.
This is just great Star Trek. This ship coming at you. Now they do a lot of talking. It's the one. This is a great shot. There's and some of this was in the script. I mean, I was careful. I was calling shots in the script in terms of when we were what we were seeing outside with the collision and what we were seeing inside. And I think I even scripted that you could see flames coming into the walls. This shot was scripted, this kind of busy star field. So a lot of it was on the page. And I think had to be to some degree, particularly in an episode like this. I remember wondering how they were going to do that.
It's really cool.
And
an area of space known as the Typhon Expanse. We're the first Starfleet.
I remember watching it for the first time, and I was very, very amused at, they're not going to do that again, are they? And yes, you did over and over again, and it was so wonderful to see the daring of this.
Well, that was my question to you guys. What was it like? And I'm not saying this in a self-aggrandizing way. It's just a truly curious way. What was it like to watch a weirdo episode like this?
It was a lot of fun. It was absolutely a lot of fun because I remember watching this the first time it was on. And just sort of enjoying the ride and wondering how it was going to resolve and how many more switch-ups we were going to have. It was very enjoyable.
And I think it's important to remember this came on the week after The Outcast. There could not be 2 more different episodes. So, you go from The Outcast, which is sort of, this tender, love story, sci-fi love story, and then all of a sudden, and then you have this techno mystery. So that, again, that's what was great about Star Trek. You never knew what to expect. And then, I think what was the next week? The next week was First Duty, which is another great episode, which is completely different. Mutiny at Starfleet Academy, not Mutiny, but so I mean, look, just in 3 weeks, look how different these 3 episodes are. And I mean, this is really. Look, the show.
Three really good ones too.
Yeah,
3 really good ones. And, season 5 didn't necessarily fire on all thrusters, if I recall, at the beginning, but by the middle to the end of the season, I mean, it was rocking. And look, you've talked about this on the show before. You were doing 26 episodes a year.
Yeah.
That's insane.
By the way, this is the scene that I wonder, is this the scene? No, maybe this scene's okay. Maybe it's a later one. Yeah, doing 26 a year was brutal, man. And, you always you set out to make each one special. There's a certain level of quality that people were coming to expect from this show. And it was challenging, and a lot of that, it starts with the writing,
And they forget what a short hiatus you had, too.
Oh, yeah, we had 2 weeks off. We had 2 weeks off. Like 2 weeks, not figuratively, literally. And then we were back to the grind. And, we had a little bit of a lead time, to get some episodes written, but we'd never get more than 3 or 4 done, And then those are gobbled up by production immediately. These shows were shot in 7 days.
Yeah.
And there's a shot that's just kind of, and I think in the script, I described it as just kind of a feeling of inevitability. And it came up with this kind of side angle of just kind of this feeling of, I was also always interested in writing stuff for the show where people weren't talking, because they seemed to be talking a lot. So I always enjoyed little scenes where people were doing stuff.
I also like that Frakes is going handheld here, because this show didn't do much handheld. It was a little more formal. I mean, and so the fact that she's sort of like having all this breakdown and we're shooting handheld rather than being on dolly or anything. It's nice. It's a nice choice.
Yeah, I agree.
And with your statement of the feeling of inevitability, this scene sort of eases that a bit, because it shows that she can do something different this time around.
That's right. And yet, even still, she knocks over the thing, which tells the audience this is probably doomed.
Right.
In my room, but no one else is here.
Sensors just picked up something.
It could be that ghost that wants to have sex with you, Beverly.
No, there are the good ones and the bad ones.
But even the bad ones now, in retrospect, they're so much fun. It's like the same reason, like we'll throw on Spock's brain or something. It's just like you can appreciate them in a new light.
Well, Spock's brain is actually a masterpiece compared to Sub Rosa. This was cool. I love stuff like this where we're hearing what sound like ghostly voices, but there's a technical explanation. It's their voices,
echoing
from all the different iterations of the loops. It's a cool narrow bandwidth analysis. That's reasonable.
Sure,
absolutely.
Not too foreign.
And
can we isolate the voices?
Yeah,
it's
interesting.
We can.
Because you mentioned earlier that the show had wanted to do Rashomon for a while, and whenever it did, it was like a matter of perspective. It was exactly what you expect—the murder mystery from multiple perspectives. Using the holodeck to recreate. But this is, as you said, it inspired Rashomon, but it's not doing Rashomon. But it's a great jumping-off point to give you something that feels much more Trekian than just like, oh, okay, we're going to take a movie and we're going to knock it off and do it, in the Star Trek universe. I mean, this just feels wholly original.
Yeah, and sometimes there's Palm Springs and Edge of Tomorrow are 2 recent examples of time loop stories. Right. And it's kind of become a subgenre or a subgenre,
Yep.
This is going to sound pretty wild.
And there's a certain it's this scene, I rewrote this thing so many times. They kept kicking it. Michael Piller and Jerry Taylor kept kicking it back to me.
Yeah.
I remember that it was over the Christmas holiday. I went back to visit my family in Ohio, and I remember this scene, working on this scene over the holiday, can't remember what year it was, but 91 maybe.
Yeah, that's always nice. You get a little bit of a break, and then all of a sudden it's like you
Well,
find yourself doing a rewrite of a.
I had to. This was my first really challenging.
It's the same with the phase shift in my visor.
Having to make this clear and interesting. And by the way, God bless Patrick Stewart for committing. I mean, like, these guys have to sell it.
Was this for your first sole script credit? Because you had done like Reunion with Ron, right? You'd done a couple of where you were.
The first one I wrote all on my lonesome was Identity Crisis.
Oh, right.
And The Game, I think, were before this.
Sure.
I don't know if I ended up getting sole credit, but those were ones I wrote. And of course, Identity Crisis was my homage to Blow Up. Another techno mystery of sorts, as was The Game, which was Invasion of the Body Snatchers. You can see how bereft my imagination was. This was my only truly original idea. So here they're figuring it out. And it's cool because you kind of feel like this could have been the end of the show. But I remember thinking, no, they have to blow up again and forget everything. Like, and that's kind of where I hit a wall. I couldn't figure out how to get them out of the loop. And
I mean, how much of this were you? I mean, like, it's a long time, so you may not remember. But how much were you breaking in the room, and how much were you kind of figuring out on your own?
It was 50-50. I mean, we did pretty detailed breaks, but sometimes we would leave it up to the writer. And in this case, I believe I just was like, had to bring it back to the room to say, guys, I need some help here. You know, but a lot of times you figure out the important stuff, and you know where things are going. But you know, a lot of it you're discovering as you're writing.
And it was always good to be on script because you didn't have to take pitches from writers. Because that was, of course, what was unique about Next Generation was that they were seeing pitches. If you had a lawyer or you had an agent or if you would sign a release form, potentially you could have your script looked at by Star Trek. And you know, so much of the low-level writers' times and some of the high-level writers were consumed by taking these pitches from writers. So when you were on script, you didn't have to take pitches.
No, yeah. If you were on script, you were kind of sent off to go write. And Michael Piller liked to have everybody involved in the story breaks. He was very, that was important to him. So several hours a day was that. So we were all involved in every episode.
We're in business. All we need now is a message.
Senior officers report to the bridge.
On our way.
Prepare for being destroyed again.
So even when you were on script, he would still have you come in and you'd be breaking episodes that were coming down the pike.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It was very much, I mean, like modern writing staff, or some staff, but, you know, it was a great group. It was just wonderful group of writers, not a huge staff.
I was going to say, given how many episodes you guys were doing a year, it wasn't really that big a staff. And Michael would always talk about how hard it was to find writers who could write Star Trek.
It was. I mean, he had a young staff. I mean, Jerry Taylor was his most seasoned person. He was amazing. And then he had these kids, and I'm sure it was. He brought some Emmy award-winning writers in there, and they just incredibly talented people. Just didn't get the show.
Right.
It was just a particular thing. I mean,
by the way, I have to say, I really love the remastered version. The color timing is so much better than it was on the original broadcast versions.
That's a great point. It's amazing. You watch when these were broadcast. It's like you're looking at a Vaseline coated TV. It's so blurry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great to see these remastered.
This is kind of a thankless episode for Michelle Forbes, though, isn't it?
Look, at the time she was kind of a semi-regular. I don't know why. That could have been anybody there, but we were kind of assuming at that time she was going to be a part of our show.
Right.
And this was before Pillar wanted to put her on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
What would become the Nana visitor role.
Yeah.
And I think here we have the final loop. I agree. This is where it's just kind of like, okay.
let's see how it spins out.
So the concept of the numbers subliminally appearing, I honestly can't remember how that came up. It was in the writer's room, but it was the right move because you have another mystery. Why is that number appearing?
Right.
So, and that's kind of an added, I think what makes the ending satisfying is that you got a mystery in a mystery. Well, you solved the mystery of why they're in the loop. Now you have the mystery of what the hell this is supposed to mean, or why it's happening.
It's funny with all the commercial breaks and the the cliffhangers or the explosion and go to commercial. It reminded me of when I used to watch the original series with my dad, because after those things would happen when we were watching them, he would always turn to me and say, "Well," as if what's going to happen next. He did that all the time, and it doesn't leave my head. Every time I see something like this, especially this episode, I hear my dad saying that, and it's really fun.
Well, it's great because in this episode, the acts really are acts, and the act breaks really land very powerfully. And this is back when you sat through the commercials, so the act breaks were important. It's not like streaming where
right. Well, yeah, I mean, act breaks can be so arbitrary sometimes, but in this episode, they are distinct ends to the time loop.
Right.
So it's like using the commercial breaks to your advantage. And here we have this scene shot a little bit of a slightly different way. And we had these wonderful ceilings you never get to see.
Right.
And this is great. The low angle Frakes really did a nice job on this.
You rarely see that ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. A lot of detail that Herman Zimmerman put in. And this is the scene where I felt like, did I need to see this again?
Right. Let's talk about your visor, Jordy.
Well, but this scene we've seen it multiple times.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And now she runs an optical diagnostic. And this is where I was kind of like, well, why are we watching? This is just in retrospect.
Yeah, of course.
I'm like, why are we watching this? Why is this scene important?
Yeah, but Brannon, it's the old expression. Art is never, you never finish. It's only abandoned. And it's like, It's really hard to watch stuff you made 10, 20, 30 years ago because you're looking at it, you're re-editing in your mind, you're remixing it, you're rewriting it. You can't help it. Even the best.
Yeah, no, I know. I love that he has a painting of his own ship.
Right.
In case you forget what it looks like.
Like, wouldn't you maybe have a field of flowers or something something you can't see every day? But this was a nice touch because here you just have Picard having deja vu about reading something, which he'd mentioned earlier.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like a painting of space to remind me I'm in space.
It's urgent.
I'm on my way.
I hate this book.
And then that was, I just wanted.
His dizziness is being caused by a phase shift in his
Yeah, so here's a continuation of this scene. This scene, in retrospect, just wasn't really necessary right now.
Right.
Now, I guess it was to explain what was happening with his visor.
Neutralize subspace scan to look for anything unusual.
Aye, sir.
Keep me advised, Doctor.
But also, was this you or is this Michael? Because I know Michael sometimes likes to add the sort of superfluous technobabble.
I have to. Can I pee real quick? Can you guys pause this?
Yeah. Okay. Hold on.
I have encountered the numeral 3 an inordinate number of times over the last 2 hours.
So Mark, you had a question about Pillar.
Yeah, just, I know that Pillar was very fond of technobabble and felt that it gave the show credibility. So I know you're not as fond of it here.
Oh.
And I wonder if maybe this was sort of Michael sort of pressuring.
No, not at all. No, I like technobabble. I relied on it to some degree. I mean, especially in something like this, I can send a message to my positronic net. I mean, what would I do without Dave's positronic net?
Here's yet another angle up above. This is something
you
we've
haven't
never
seen this shot before, nor will again.
Yeah.
Oh, one of my favorite moments in this is earlier when Picard hears himself calling the order to abandon ship. Is a great moment. It's because it's so creepy. Like you're listening to yourself dying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're right about this. Then perhaps we can escape from the loop by avoiding the collision.
That's our guess.
And they're having the same discussion again.
Yeah.
And I guess we really took this to the brink of the very end of the story. Like it really, at the last minute they figure it out. Here comes Captain Batesman. The end. It's a good finish.
Yeah. Now, is this apocryphal? You may not know, because you may not have been involved in this, but after Kelsey was cast, a big Star Trek fan, as Bateman, there was talk of wanting to get Kirstie Alley to be the first officer on the ship. Do you know if there's any truth to that? Is that an apocryphal story?
A first officer on which ship?
On the Bozeman.
Oh, I don't think that's true.
Okay.
We may have talked about her being the captain, or something. I don't know if Kelsey was always, I didn't get involved a lot in casting. I mean, sure. I remember learning that Kelsey was going to do it. I can't confirm or deny that. I doubt it though. I think it would have been overkill. It would have been distracting, for the ending.
Because then you want to see that whole episode.
Yeah.
With the
report.
So of course, the scene that began the show that we've seen over and over again is now the finale.
Let's have a shout out though to the Riker stance on there with his foot up on the.
Yeah, I was never fully convinced. It doesn't happen in this one, but when he's thrown to the ground. It was just like, yeah.
It's slightly inhuman.
But no, he had his feet on the furniture all the time. Get your foot off the console.
See, what it turns out is that it's his foot on the console that is pressing this button that is exploding them.
No, but his stage is beautiful. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the story point that Riker's standing right by Data. It's funny, Mark, I'm sure you've talked about how weird it is in some of these two shots that if you could have made these remasters a wider perspective, people look weird sitting so close together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh,
and then rank insignia as a...
The tractor beam will not be successful.
The magic number.
I am decompressing the main shuttle bay.
Surely it doesn't take that many buttons to decompress the shuttle bay.
Well, everything would be so automated, right? It's like, but for dramatic reasons.
Whew. Well.
Data, what happened?
At the last moment,
I mean, these were fun times making this show. Going down to the set and seeing.
That indicated to me that his suggestion.
That was your whole life then. I mean, 26 episodes, 50 weeks a year, working till, 3, 4 in the morning. I mean,
it was fun, but And what you don't, and of course, you don't realize at the time that this show would go on to become a popular show for decades.
Yeah.
But you don't know that when you're doing it. You know, I watch this now with so much fondness and remembrance. I mean,
we're talking about this. What is it? This was the 5th season, so this was what, 93 or 94?
Yeah, about 28 years ago. Something like that.
I mean, it's crazy.
It is crazy. And I mean, I still enjoy talking about it.
And that's crazy too.
Well, they were formative. They weren't boring to do. I mean, this show was an amazing experience. I mean, everything that you can imagine working on a show like this, it was there, and it was challenging. I always loved seeing the bridges of other ships. And if it was just a one-wall set. I love those uniforms from the
original movies. Yeah.
Sensors detected a temporal distortion.
And plus, it's also people who are no longer with us. And when you look back on obviously Michael Piller, who was such a important figure in your early career, and
we left Starbase only 3 weeks ago.
You guys were all so tight as friends. How could you not be working together for so long? And then you guys all go on to create and do your own shows. So that kind of close knit stuff by necessity, just sort of everyone goes their own way. So like when you look back at your friends from high school and you say, oh my God, you all went, and you're a lawyer and you're a doctor and you're this, and boy, we were all such good friends, and I haven't seen you in,
Let's see who edited this episode.
Yeah, we'll take a look. So you can give them their props finally. And no casting in this episode other than having to cast, it was an offer. J.P. Farrell.
J.P. Farrell, yeah, he was great. Yeah, the Cheers was shooting down not far from us.
Yeah.
On the Paramount lot. And and by the way, it's worth mentioning, this episode cost nothing.
Right.
Like
except for
it had a couple of visual effects.
Yeah.
But really, this show was one of these episodes that undoubtedly saved money.
Right.
But it's just a real testament to how you don't have to have magnificent, endless action sequences. You're just telling a simple story that on this show is considered a bottle show.
Yeah.
It was a bottle show that was one step away from being a clip show.
Well said. Oh, what's that?
Lauren.
Oh, credit for the Indonesia
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Look at that.
What's that?
Dharmawan was Worf and Bateson.
What's that? What are you guys watching?
It's in the credits. They have it in there on
This is
on
off
Netflix.
the Blu-ray.
On Netflix.
What?
No, this is Netflix.
Oh, this is Netflix. Oh, it's Netflix. Okay.
But why the Indonesia version and not the Japanese version?
It beats me.
Oh, well, look at that. How interesting. Well, all the money you saved went into the next episode in the first duty, because they had to build, go on location and support the dam, and they had to build all those Starfleet Academy quarters and big cast for that episode.
Oh, yeah. No, I remember when we'd have a new set or something like that, we'd always go down. And I remember being on the set for the first duty. And I remember, we're not doing commentary for the first duty, but
no, we're not.
But one of my top 5 Picard lines is in that show. A live omission is still a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And that scene where he chews out fucking Wesley Crusher, it's one of the great Picard scenes.
Oh yeah,
yeah. He's really great. See, now you got your coming attractions for next week.
There you go.
So we did the promo. Well, this was great, and I appreciate you taking the time to look back at cause and effect. And the great thing is we're going to do it again next week.
There you go.
But it's always good to talk Star Trek with you. And God, when we start talking about how old these episodes are, it blows my mind.
I know. Yeah, I know.
Crazy.
I know.
Where'd the time go?
Well, in a funny way, that it's reassuring because it's like, yes, a lot of time has passed, but I don't know. There's something kind of it grounds you in the recollection is reassuring somehow. It's like we have something that we can. It's not like the past was empty,
right? Mm-hmm.
You know.
And I'm glad it still holds up. You know, it's not something you look back and say, "Oh, you know, if only."
Well, by the way, that is a huge testament to the sensibility that the behind the scenes people insisted on. Like the characters would speak and that's why they were hard to write. It's kind of this weird classical, like no current jargon, but not too stiff. Like there's these episodes, they're shot in a very classical style. There's not a lot to date them. They're shot on 35 millimeter film. It's, some of the visual effects, of course, but there's not a lot to date them. The scores are classical, big orchestral scores, and I think it's one of the reasons. There's just, you watch an episode like that, there's nothing necessarily telling you that wasn't shot a week ago.
Right.
And people forget you didn't have a lot of money. I mean, these were $1.5 million. I mean, it inched up over the years, but this was not a lot of money then. It's definitely not a lot of money now.
Again, 7 days. We never went outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very
and if
rarely.
We did, it was like a field, like we had a certain number of days per season that we could go out on location.
Yeah.
And when we did, it was like a mess because no one was used to doing it. And yeah, I mean, we definitely had to we never could rely on visual effects. We always had such a limited budget that we kind of had to figure out cool stories to do that were the kinds of stories Gene wanted to do, which were, this wasn't an action show.
No, it definitely wasn't.
Anyway, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Brannon. Thank you, audience, for joining us for another episode of the Treksperts Briefing Room. Listen to Treksperts Briefing Room on Inglorious Trek, and you can listen to it on its own feed at Treksperts Briefing Room. To find out about upcoming episodes, you can follow us on social at Inglorious Trek on Twitter and Inglorious Treksperts on Clubhouse and on Instagram. So, and join us for our live after shows on Clubhouse intermittently, and enjoy our other podcasts such as Best Movies Never Made, like Rebel and the Rogue, and the 430 movie on Electric Now, where you can watch streaming video podcasts, download the Electric Now app. So until next time, on behalf of Brannon Braga, myself, Mark Altman, and Darren Doctorman, keep on trekking ingloriously, of course.
And the briefing room is now closed.
Scott, would you repeat what you just told us?
About an hour ago, bridge control started going crazy. Levers shifting by themselves, buttons being pushed, instrument readings changing.
And on my monitor screen, I could see Mitchell smiling each time it happened, as if his ship and crew were almost a toy for his amusement.
This show was produced by Dean Devlin and Mark A. Altman and is an Electric Surge Network production.